Welcome to the Micromobility Report Podcast. I'm Irene McAleese, co-founder of C-Sense.
And I'm Phil Latz, founder of the Micromobility Report.
Today we're excited to share with you our conversation with Tom Cooper, the Australia-New Zealand General Manager of Beam, a global micromobility company undergoing impressive growth in the APAC region. With 20,000 vehicles and a team of almost 400 in Australia and New Zealand alone, Tom's insights into Beam's success as well as the challenges along the way make for interesting listening. We hope you enjoy our discussion with Tom Cooper.
Well, Tom, welcome to the Micromobility Report Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Phil. Excited to be here.
Excellent. So let's start with a bit of overview. We might start first actually with yourself, your personal overview. How long have you been with Beam?
I've been with Beam for almost 4 years now, and in the micromobility industry for almost 6. So quite a long time moving e-scooters and e-bikes around cities in Australia and New Zealand.
So talk a little bit about what you were doing before you joined Beam.
So before I joined Beam, I was an accountant, and I also had a business with my brother that was in allied health bookings. So I'd been in the startup space a little bit, but my background is an accountant, so number crunching.
Well, we won't hold that against you, don't worry. And what attracted you to join Beam?
So I was having some time off, and I was in London, and my brother and I, we rode the Boris bikes. I think they're called something else now, but around London. And it was just such a great way to see a city. We'd been to London previously, but we'd never used the bikes, and we decided for a couple of weeks we're going to use the bikes. And we just got to see so much more of the city, and we discovered different cafes, shops, etc. And it just worked really, really well. And I thought, wow, this is a great way to get around a city. And so I came back to Australia and didn't think much more of it. And then it was probably November 2018. And some friends called and said they were thinking of starting an e-scooter business. And I said, look, I'm not that interested, but I'll come along. And so they're like, no, just come down and ride one. And I went down to Collingwood where they had a warehouse and jumped on a scooter. And I called my now wife 10 minutes later and said, sweetie, I think I'm going to do this. And, we've been doing scooters ever since, and it hasn't been easy. Look, there has been lots of ups and downs. And whenever you're trying to change legislation or regulations, it's a slow, painful process. And I don't even think we're there yet. I think we've made huge strides. But two of the largest cities in Australia, Melbourne has just got a program over the last year or so, and Sydney doesn't have an e-scooter program except for one small trial that Beam runs in Cogra. So I think there's still a huge amount of scope for growth in Australia and New Zealand for micromobility.
Okay, so let's switch the focus a little bit to the company. So Beam is actually Singapore-based multinational, if you like, but how many years has it been operating in Australia?
So Beam launched in Australia in 2019, so it's been in Australia now for almost 5 years.
Okay, and give us an overview of how many bikes and scooters across the total company, and then in particular Australia and New Zealand, and also just to clarify, you're responsible for New Zealand as well, are you not, personally?
Yes, Australia and New Zealand. So globally, Beam's in 100 cities, has about 80,000 vehicles on the ground. And then closer to home in Australia and New Zealand, we're in 38 markets and about 20,000 vehicles.
Okay. So I just was on the your LinkedIn post, and there's some pretty impressive milestones in a recent post that you put out. Would you like to highlight any of those?
I'm not sure which one that is, Phil, but we've been really fortunate over the last 4 or 5 years to grow a sustainable business. And I think I can speak for anyone that's in micromobility. Everyone is very passionate, but it is a hard business to run. You have a lot of moving assets around cities. And so we've been fortunate to build a strong team and make sure that we can deliver what councils are looking for on a consistent basis. And that enables us to put devices down and people to enjoy. And that's one thing that I love, is actually seeing people riding our vehicles, and that they often have a smile on their face, and it makes all the hard work really worthwhile. So I feel very fortunate to be involved in a company that gets to move people around every day.
No, it's great. Just one final thing from me. You mentioned the word team then. Are you able to share approximately what your head count might be in Australia and New Zealand?
So we have close to 300 or almost 400 full-time and casuals across the region.
That might surprise a fair few people, just how large that head count is.
Yeah, it does. We're a pretty big business now. We're in 38 markets, so there's a lot of vehicles out in the street, and providing a service is about delivering quality, consistent service, and we're very lucky to have a team that does that for us every day.
I actually loved hearing you speak about what got you excited about scooters at the outset. I mean, I know our listeners won't be able to see your face, but I could see you genuinely lit up. Your eyes seemed excited when you were talking about the first time you rode that scooter, and that kind of buzz and the feeling. And I've experienced that too the first time I rode them. It is a sense of freedom and childlike excitement, I think, almost. So I think it's fantastic to see you with that enthusiasm still as a CEO, even though you have all the pressures and the complexity of running a business like that, to see your face genuinely light up at that buzz and wanting to share that with people. And I'm also interested to hear that you experienced, was it scooters in London or bikes, did you say?
Bikes.
It was bikes
So
in
this
London.
was back in 2018.
Yeah, I was thinking, because the scooter trial started much later in London. But it's definitely a great way to see the city. Also really interesting to hear that you're an accountant by training, because there's so much talk really about micromobility companies needing to manage their EBITDA and profitability and all of this. So really this is where that passion and interest needs to come together with a good business sense in being able to run this company, which is clearly what you've been able to do to be so successful. I was thinking though that, it sounds you guys have had some really phenomenal success in Australia, which is great to hear. I maybe just want to sort of understand though from a little bit more about what are the challenges that you might have experienced throughout that growth. Has it all been easy sailing or easy riding, so to speak?
It certainly hasn't.
Love to hear a bit more.
Yeah, so I think there's challenges of we have hardware and technology, and so getting both of them to work together is a challenge every day, and we're really lucky to have great engineers and operations teams. When we look at regulations, there's not a consistent regulation in Australia for e-scooters. So in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, and then over to New Zealand, everywhere has a different regulation. So some markets you can be 16 to ride, some you're 18, some are on footpaths, some are on roads. So it makes it very nuanced, our approach and the way that we operate in all of these cities. I think hopefully over time, as people realise that micromobility is here to stay, it's not a fad. People are using it every day. There's millions of trips every year. That the regulations will evolve, and there'll be more thought put towards how can we turn this into a reliable and consistent form of transportation for everyone. So that includes things like bike lanes, regulations around where they can be ridden. Helmet use is important. Age of riders. It's challenged in some markets where you have to be 18 and over to ride a scooter, but then basically you can be 16 to start driving. So
right.
We want to see consistency around that, and a lot of young people are saying we're not necessarily keen on getting a car license, but we need to give them other forms of transportation so that they can link to PT.
Yeah, that's actually mind-boggling to think that you can get a car license before you can get a scooter license.
Well, you don't need a license, but legally,
yes,
be able to
legally be able to use one. Yeah. So with all of those different regulations, that complexity, that must fall back to you in increased cost, really, in terms of how you need to manage those bids when you're heading into a city. You need to understand that regulatory environment. You need to have people who are engaging with the city, presumably, to understand the unique niches and complexity or policies of that particular area. And I guess that's an overhead that you're saying could be much more streamlined if there was more standards in how the regulations worked across the states.
The confusion comes, Irene, when someone is a regular rider in Brisbane, and you can ride on the footpath and the road at different speed limits, and then you go to Adelaide and you can only ride on the footpath. It's just that knowledge barrier where someone's like, oh, well, the safest place for me in this particular situation is on the footpath or the road, whatever it might be. And that flexibility, I think, is really important for users, so that they can find the safest possible way to get around these streets and enjoy getting from A to B.
Yeah. I have to say that has really struck me coming to Australia. I've been in the UK for the last 20 years and across Europe, and most of the technology seems to be talking about detecting riders on footpaths as if that was a bad thing. And then coming here, it's quite fine to ride on a footpath. So I can understand that complexity must be challenging. And I guess messaging to your rider community about, from their perspective, what's safe and how they should be utilising infrastructure in a city.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of spurs another conversation around technology. So when we first started launching e-scooters 6 years ago, they had pretty average IoT devices, so we could see where they were every couple of seconds, but none of the geofencing technology that's just standard now. So the vehicles that you see on the street today are probably the most controlled vehicles of any form of transportation. We can have slow zones, no-go zones, where they can park. We've got audio alerts, so we let users know that they're entering into a certain zone. And recently we've just launched camera technology, which detects where people are riding. So if they're riding on the footpath, the road, or a bike lane, and it can adjust the speed accordingly. So the technology that we now have helps with some of those regulations, Irene, but the challenge is it's still a lot of technology to put on every device to control, and users get confused. They say, hang on a second, why can't I ride on a footpath here, or why can't I ride on the road here? So we're trying to solve those problems through technology, but there is still that human element and misunderstanding around regulations.
So you do have the technology to detect if they're on a footpath or not, but then in some states you're saying that may not be an issue. So yeah, that can see that would make it complex for you in terms of how you set up alerts or reactions to these different things. You would have to almost
the
get that on a
alerts
state by
is
state
not
basis.
so much of a the alerts isn't so much of a challenge. It's the purchasing hardware, because of different hardware does different things, and so if we don't need it in a certain market, then we don't put it on, and if we need it, then we put it on. So,
right. So you'd
goes
have
back to supply chain.
Yeah, and whether you would get full integration of this technology at the build process, or you retrofitting it, which is more expensive then. Yes, yeah, okay. And does this, in all of this technological expertise that you talked about, the geofencing, the slow zones, knowing where to no-go zones and where to park, camera tech, is that something that Beam has capability to develop in-house, or is this something where you work with external suppliers to help?
No, most of our technology is built in-house. So we build our technology in-house, and we use an OEM for our supply of hardware, which we have done from the get-go. The reason that we chose to do that is that we think there's the opportunity for them to innovate and grow their hardware offerings for us. And I think a perfect example is that we gave them feedback. We were looking for a smaller, lighter e-bike, and so they designed one. It's a great device, and we launched that in Wellington a couple of weeks ago, and we're launching in an Australian city next week. So we're going to see lots of hardware innovation that we as a company probably couldn't do on our own.
Yes.
But the fact that our OEM has other clients, they can spend millions and millions of dollars on R&D, and we get the benefits from that.
Yeah, but then that's great that you can help influence and shape what's required because you've got that great relationship with them. Are there any other technological advances that you see on the way? And I guess the second question as part of that is, how much should an e-scooter company be expected to continue to deliver around these technological innovations? Because, I mean, as you said at the start, that there is a lot else that can be done in terms of infrastructure or other things that cities could be doing. So where do what other tech do you see as needed potentially, and where do you draw the line as to how far you have to keep innovating in that space?
I think an interesting one is we often get asked about, drink riding. So about 12 months ago, we sat down and we developed a rider cognitive test. So I want to be clear, it's not a drink riding test, it's a cognitive test that tests reactionary speed. And so we introduced that, and we turned that on at certain times of the week in certain cities and certain locations, so that, if people are thinking of going for a ride, we just test and remind them that drink riding is illegal. We have had requests, can we get a breathalyzer built into a scooter? And my response to that is probably not. That most people don't have a breathalyzer built into their car.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a good example of how far we're prepared to go in terms of innovation. But we are not the police, so we don't police that. We strongly encourage people and remind people of the rules, but we are not the police, so we won't be putting breathalyzers on vehicles.
Right. And just last question for me then, what is the importance for you for infrastructure then for the operation and expansion of your business in terms of what the city can contribute?
Well, I think what we've seen in a lot of markets is when protected bikeways are built, the increase in ridership. So many people I talk to on a day-to-day basis say, I would ride more, but I just don't feel safe. And so there's painted bike lanes along a lot of suburban streets throughout Australia, but a white line can be veered over. And Phil, as an experienced cyclist, would know this. And so what we see is protected bike lanes are just the way that people feel comfortable. And once people start to feel comfortable, they will do it more. And that's sort of how we see our business grow. We've moved from a predominantly leisure to now we're seeing a really strong commuter base using our product. And we think that will continue to grow in the coming years.
That's great. We were going to ask you a little bit more about the demographics, actually. Phil, do you want me to jump in with that? Because I know you had a few other questions to come back to as well. I don't want to hog all of the questions with Tom.
Just getting into some money and logistics issues, Tom. 2 questions. Firstly, your relationships with local governments. Clearly that's the critical level of government that you mainly deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you have to sometimes pay them money. Also, sometimes the bids are a lot of work, but it's only a 12-month or 2-year or whatever contract. Any comment on those 2 points?
Yeah, so in some markets, we do pay to operate on the streets, and that's across Australia and New Zealand. In terms of bid or permit length, we are seeing them increase. So the first permit I ever was involved with was for 6 months. So as you can imagine, it's pretty hard to set up a business, put in charging infrastructure, rent a warehouse, cars, vans, staff for 6 months. Now we're starting to see 3, 4, 5 years permits, and that's a much better length. And we hope over the coming years that 5 years will become the standard sort of operating permit length. of markets.
And just the relationship with the councils, and I guess through the councils to the public about, these scooters are lying on the ground, they're in the way, level of service agreements, etc. Any comments on any of that?
Look, we're always working really closely with the councils to deliver the best possible service we can. There will be challenges from time to time, but I think what we've seen over the last 5 years is that it's improved, and that some of the challenges that when we launched are no longer challenges, and we're moving now with a lot of councils to designated parking bays in high pedestrian areas. I think that's a big step forward for the industry, where all of a sudden people that are riding know exactly where they're going to park. They can see it. It's mapped on the ground for them. It's in the app. So there's no confusion. I think that's kind of like the next step is kind of realizing that micromobility is a valid form of transportation. And, a car park can fit 12 micromobility devices. So, maybe there's an opportunity to give up one car park for some micromobility car parking.
And the much publicised things that were happening with OFO and early Chinese companies of bikes and scooters ending up in the river and so on. What's your stats now? How many beam vehicles end up in the lake or the river or whatever? Do you track that data?
We do track that data. I've got an example from Wellington. So Wellington, I'm not sure if the listeners are aware, but a lot of water around Wellington. And this year we haven't had any vehicles in the water in Wellington, and that's through operations. So we have certain times of the day no parking zones near water, because it's not the riders generally that toss a vehicle into the water. It's someone walking past that thinks, hey, this could be funny, and tosses it in with some mates and they all have a laugh. So if we can remove that temptation, then we see significant decrease in it. But compared to OFO back in sort of 2016, nowhere near those numbers. And we can't afford to as a business. Our business relies on our valuable asset being utilised as much as possible.
One final question on finances, if you like. I've just come back from Taipei recently, went to the Taipei Cycle Show, rode the Share U-bikes over there quite a lot. And I've ridden in other places in Europe or what have you. And other jurisdictions can be lower cost than Australia. And I think part of this might be, I believe you have to pay very high insurance premiums and have a much more rigorous insurance structure requirements than other places. Is that true? Is that part of the reason you're of higher cost, or are there other reasons?
Well, in terms of insurance, I'm not sure on the exact requirements in some other countries, but in Australia, we have 3 forms of insurance. So we have public liability insurance, we have rider insurance, and we have third-party insurance. So we've got a really strong suite, and that's developed. When we first launched, you just needed public liability. Then we introduced rider insurance, and the third party came in about 21, 22. So, and that's been standard now across the industry. Everyone has that in Australia and New Zealand. In terms of costs, we're always working to make it as affordable as possible. And some of our subscription products now are incredibly cheap for people to ride. So we are working on that. But like every business, there is cost of living pressures that are being applied to our business, like everyone. So we are doing our best to try and keep prices as low as possible.
Actually, I'm going to come back to something you said before, which I think surprised both Irene and myself, which was the commuter aspect. And you said it started as a tourist activity and now it's a very strong commuter element. So how much savings can a commuter make on a longer term subscription package with you as opposed to the casual tourist doing a one-off ride?
Yeah, so I think like a commuter trip, depending on the subscription that they choose, they can be riding for as little as 20 cents a minute. So if the average trip length is 10 to 12 minutes, you're looking at sort of $2.40 a trip, which is very, very affordable, almost in line with public transport in a lot of cities. look, we still have a lot of leisure use, and that's important part of our business as well. But I think it's exciting for us to see that people are leaving the car at home and taking micromobility. And it works well because you can park it, and then you don't have to worry about it. And then you come out at the end of the day, and if you go into a different location, you don't have to worry about locking up your bike or your scooter. You can just take one from the street and get to and from home.
Just rolling on to looking to the future a little bit, what will it take, not just for Beam, but for the whole bike and scooter share market to, say, grow 10x? You know, how long do you think, I'm talking Australia now in particular, or Australia and New Zealand, your responsible area, you know, what's going to take to grow it 10x?
I think a good example is the 2032 Olympics in Brisbane. So, the government and council have been quite public in the fact that they want it to be a car-free Olympics. So for that to occur, we need to move hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people around Brisbane over a 3-week period. Public transport will do a lot of the heavy lifting, but micromobility, walking are going to fill up a huge amount of that as well. So I think it's those type of events which opens the door for someone that has never ridden a bike or a scooter to try it because they don't have an alternative. You can't jump in an Uber. And then that will spur them to trial it and use it potentially in other ways in their normal lives. So I think it's those type of events can help us grow 10x. And then it comes down to infrastructure. I mean, you just have to go out every morning along, in Australia and see the congestion on streets. And you really wonder if we converted one lane of traffic to a bike lane in the mornings and then same in the evenings, how many more people would jump out of cars. And a fun game I sometimes play with our little one when we're walking around is we count the number of it's probably pretty boring for other people, but how many single occupancy cars there are, and it's 9 out of 10. It's very rare that you see more than one person in a car when we're just walking along the street. So I think there's a huge incentives that the government could work on to encourage more people to ride bikes. We're in Sydney, where we live, there was a lot of families using cargo bikes. So I know there's Wombat, which is a great Australian brand that's just started up selling cargo bikes, and they're doing a huge amount of sales with families that are using them 1-2 kilometers in the morning to drop the kids off at school. And I think that's the kind of incentives we need to be pushing as a community to get people out of cars. Micromobility will benefit from that, but I think it starts at a grassroots level. Getting kids used to going to school on a bike with mum and dad is so important.
Good to hear you're training up the next generation of advocates at a young age as well. What about better integration with public transport? And one thing, Sydney, you've got the Opal card, Melbourne, you've got the MyKey card. Have you had any discussions with the public transport operators about integrating your payments into their card so it's a single one swipe, one card does all?
Yeah, we've done some trials. So we did one with Transport for New South Wales a couple of years ago, where we integrated our bikes into the Opal Plus app. And then we've been running some other mass trials across Australia and New Zealand. I think for that to be, look, one of the things that I love about public transport in New South Wales is that you can just use your phone. You don't have to have a card. You can just use your phone. You tap on, tap off. It's great. I think in the future, hopefully micromobility will go that way as well, so people can just tap on, tap off. You don't necessarily need to have an app for every device. You can just use your card. I think that's probably the future of integration, Phil, but also at train stations, bus stops, some designated parking really helps people because they know where to park. It means that bikes and scooters aren't in the way of the pedestrians. I think we're starting to see that a lot of train and tram stops are reaching out to us and saying, hey, how's best to integrate your service into the train stop.
What about the fleet size? How many of the cities that you are in do you feel restricted because you've got in your agreement with that city a fleet size which is actually smaller than you would like?
I think most of them, to be honest. And I think the challenge is there from a public perception perspective, but also from an operator perspective. I think there's been significant gains by all the operators to make parking and all the things that affect pedestrians better, and improved on that. But also, I think we're still learning. So I think an interesting stat in China, it's one micromobility device for every 20 people. In some of our most densely populated cities, we have 1 to 400, 1 to 500. So I think that gives you an idea of how far we can go. I don't think we'll ever be at the Chinese level in terms of that, but I think we could probably double the fleets in a lot of cities, and we'd be kind of where we need to be in Australia and New Zealand.
Speaking about public transport, you obviously heard about the announcement, the big announcement, pre-election announcement for the 50-cent fares across TransLink. How's that going to impact you? I mean, I know it's in Queensland only, obviously, but what are your thoughts on that, and how that affects you as a micromobility provider?
Yeah, it's a good one. We actually had this chat on Monday internally. Look, we're supportive of it. I think we don't see it as competition. We see it as an enabler. We enable more people to catch public transport. More people that catch public transport will need to use micromobility. That's how we like to look at it. So if all of a sudden people are leaving their cars at home, then maybe at lunchtime they need to go across the city, they will use a scooter or a bike. So that's kind of the way that we look at it. It's exciting for people in Queensland to get cheaper public transport, and hopefully utilisation increases.
Yeah, it might be part of that shift, as you were talking about, that mindset shift. But I think some of the commentary I've heard is that obviously it's going to serve people well who are already in areas that have good public transport. So if you live near a train line, that's great. Or if you have a really good bus service where you live, that's great. But for others who maybe aren't so well connected, scooters could be filling some of those gaps currently, right?
Yes, we've been working on a trial with the Brisbane City Council, first and last mile trial, for the last 12 months, and we're starting to see some growth in that, where there's some hubs in less service public transport areas where scooters are available to bring people to and from those hubs, and we're seeing sort of steady growth in that. It's not shooting the lights out, but it is actually growing slowly. So those are the kinds of projects that we have to continue to work on with councils and governments. And so, we appreciate that Brisbane City Council is really committed to growing that. And so we're grateful to be in partnership with them.
Fantastic. So just coming back to that, you mentioned earlier about so many commuters, which is really fascinating. Would you have any more breakdown about the kind of riders that you have? What would be their split, say, around gender, income, age, that kind of thing, or even the locations where they're tending to ride from?
Yeah, so in terms of gender, we see it about 60% male, 40% female. Our fastest growing cohort is actually a plus of 45 and over cohort, which is exciting to see.
Wow.
A lot of people think that micromobility is just for young, 18-year-old boys, but the largest user bases that we're seeing are the older ones, which is great. And I think a lot of people have potentially been hesitant to try, but once they've tried, they've realised how easy it is, how safe and secure you feel when riding a scooter or a bike, and so they're doing it a lot more. So that's something that we're really excited about. In terms of income, we don't collect that information.
Mm-hmm.
I must ask, I just went to Brisbane recently and I had a first ride or two. I rode a bunch of your scooters around and had a first go on your seated scooter.
Yes.
How is that going in terms of rides per scooter per day compared to the standing scooters?
So it's about comparable to the standing scooter, but what we are seeing is 30% longer trips on that one. So people are particularly at commuter times. We're seeing it, being very, very popular for commuters to jump on in the morning and the evenings, and go potentially, 2 to 3 Ks rather than sort of 1 to 2 kilometres.
Any other questions from you, Irene?
No, I think that's all.
Well, I'll just ask a final question for you, Tom. A bit of a catch-all, but is there anything we've missed that you would like to mention that we didn't really give you the opportunity?
I think you've covered off a lot of things. The industry is very exciting. It's growing, and I think we're pretty fortunate to be at the start of this journey. If you look at a lot of Australian cities, they haven't had a new form of transportation in the last 100 years. So there will be some teething pains with micromobility, but I think we're moving past those. Operators are doing their best to bring technology to solve problems, but we need to continue to push for better infrastructure, whether it's protected bike lanes or parking, that can alleviate some of the challenges so that micromobility can be a form factor that is just like a park bench. People are used to it, it's there, and it's reliable. So we're excited about the future in Australia and New Zealand. It's just getting started, and hopefully lots of people. I encourage all your listeners to get out there and trial an e-scooter or an e-bike if they haven't previously.
Well, Tom Cooper, thanks very much for being on the Micromobility Report podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Phil and Irene. It was lovely to see you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Irene, I thought that was a fantastic conversation with Tom, and I was really excited and encouraged by a few things. Firstly, the rate of growth, to see that this market is growing after all the naysayers talking about shared vehicles being dredged up from the bottom of rivers and so on. It's clearly not the case that things are really going ahead in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was also really fascinating to hear the potential for more growth, particularly with the Olympics coming to Queensland for 2032, and that this could really be kind of a tipping point for much larger saturation of the market. So really impressive to see their trajectory and also to hear of their ambition.
Absolutely. Actually, when I was up in Queensland recently, the Olympics aren't really on the radar for the southern states, but they're already a big, big deal in Brisbane coming up in 2032. And so let's hope that we can, as a micromobility community, really get some leverage out of that event.
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken with some people here that are involved with the planning of this, and maybe this is something we can go into later, but there's only so many people that will be able to drive to one of these venues, so public transport is going to be a big part of the issue. But as Tom said, there's so much scope for people to do those last mile journeys over these forms of micromobility, and we're talking millions of people that will be coming for the event, so really could be very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, now we're going to move on to a new session that we're going to have at the end of each of our podcasts, which we've decided to call What's Up, because What's Up is short, to the point, and that's a common phrase in Australia. So this will be just a chance for Irene and myself to share something that we're doing or something that's on our radar. So Irene, what's up for you?
So, what's up for me? Well, firstly, I was quite interested to hear this week that University of Queensland are launching a new micromobility cluster. So, I'm going to find out a little more about that, but I think it is about academia as well as industry coming together to look at a lot of innovation and policy initiatives. So, that could be very interesting for the industry. I'm also keenly watching the UK election. Now, this broadcast might come out by the time the election has happened in the UK, but there's a lot of talk about the Labor government, potentially coming in. So that will be very interesting because it's been, there's a pretty divisive campaign that's going on at the moment involving active travel. So it'll be very interesting to see how that pans out, who gets elected, and what that means for the UK going forward. And last but not least, I'm really excited to be speaking at the ITS Australia Summit coming up on the 13th to the 15th of August. ITS, Intelligent Transport Systems. First went to an ITS conference back in Copenhagen, I think 2019, with hardly any cycling or hardly any micromobility happening in this space. Everything was about connected cars and drones and all other kinds of transport that didn't involve micromobility, but it really is starting to creep into the agenda, and I'm really happy to be there with C-Sense to help firmly get our foot in the door and make sure that data and micromobility gets to be considered as cities start to plan more and more in this space.
That's fantastic. Yes, I was lucky enough to go to the ITS Summit in Melbourne last year. It really is the big end of town in the transportation world, but I'm happy to report that since your experience 5 or 6 years ago in Copenhagen, in Melbourne it was much more open to micromobility and got a pretty good hearing, which was good. So
Great.
My 2 WhatsApps would be, number 1, old news now for most, but just to comment on the federal infrastructure funding announced in the budget in May, that $100 million over 4 years, starting from the 1st of July 2025. Not as much as we'd like, not as soon as we'd like it, but it is unprecedented in our 123 years since Federation. This is the first time that the federal government has committed to ongoing infrastructure spending specifically targeted to cycling and walking. So it's a good precedent, and it's something that we can hopefully build on.
Absolutely.
And my second WhatsApp would be that I'm thrilled to say at the time of recording this that in less than 2 weeks' time I'll be heading to the UK and Europe, firstly to London, and I now have a confirmed meeting, 2 meetings in fact, at the Transport for London control room, which
Brilliant.
is not normally open to the public, but they've actually got 2 control rooms, they told me, so I'm having 2 separate visits an hour apart. I'll be visiting bike shops in London and Paris and riding lots of shared bikes and scooters and whatever else is going, and having a good look at the transport systems of those 2 cities, and then on to Eurobike, on to Frankfurt, Germany for the Eurobike show, which I have attended many times before, but this will be the biggest ever. And the European industry, unlike Australia, which is a little flat at the moment, is very buoyant. And so I'm expecting to see a lot of buzz, a lot of people, and a lot of new tech. So they are my 2 WhatsApps. Would you have anything else you'd like to add, Irene?
No, I think that's really hard to follow. I think the Eurobike and the Paris and London trips are going to be very exciting, and I love the fact that, as I do, whenever you're on holiday, you manage to find a way to get in and explore those cities. But yeah, getting a visit to the traffic control rooms at TfL is quite a coup. So I'm really interested to hear your experience of that when you come back.
No, I'm really looking forward to it. So just to wrap up, we'll be doing one of these podcasts every month. We've already got some great guests lined up for the next few months. So please subscribe, look out for the next podcast, and we look forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.